Well, welcome to today's talk. I've got an interesting topic today. I've actually been tweeting on this one and I've had some interesting reactions to it. So let's talk about it today. How does geospatial become invisible but fundamental to all our business activities? There's a big title and a fascinating conversation I hope we can have here. So let's begin. So to get started, let's just remind you, those that are new to the channel, what Spatial-Next is really focused on. It's really a two-part conversation. The first part is a focus on today and how we get to wider adoption of geospatial technology in GIS. The second part of the conversation is about tomorrow, and this is me just peering into the future. I've been in the industry for a long time. I remember the early days, before anyone had heard of the internet, talking about that, and then the early days of mobile. So I think we're at a junction now where blockchain and Web3 are still discussed, they're still emerging, but there's a tomorrow conversation. For this conversation, we're going to be focused on the first one, wider adoption. So I call this crossing the chasm. So there's a famous book about that, and people have picked me up on this is not fully accurate, but in my mind, this is how we take the industry to a wider world, if you like. So there's really two questions which make up this sort of wider adoption. The first one is, how do we get GIS out of the GIS department? Much work's been done in this area. There's been much focus on it. It's been certainly a big part of my world actually over the years. So we've got that key question that remains very relevant and I would still argue has not been fully solved. The second question is, how do we widen the adoption of GIS? So beyond the current user base. So let's tackle these two questions. First one, how do we get GIS out of the GIS department? So that, to me, that means moving from a departmental level solution to the enterprise. So at the minute, we still remain kind of locked into departments, particularly a GIS department. So I think that my sense is that promoting the Hannibal leading his army out of the mountains approach is not working. What do I mean by that? I mean by that we've tried to talk about, well, there's still lots to talk about leadership and GIS managers needing to be more entrepreneurial, think more widely across the organization about where they can apply it, talk to C-level executives about the value of GIS, finding use cases that are beyond the traditional use cases. I don't sense that conversation has been happening for a decade plus, and I'm not seeing that much change. People can show me where that's making big differences. I'm not seeing it. I think GIS managers are heads down focused on what they're doing. They're in a more reactive mode, as are their staff. And I think that the emergence of GIS from the departments is going to be difficult to come from within. So just my opinion on that one, but I'm not seeing much change there. So for that second question, how do we widen the adoption of GIS? That's really a conversation around moving from traditional to new markets. So where the industry is largely being used today in traditional sectors, infrastructure, really those that have got distributed assets, a lot of that sort of public sector, to the brand new markets that are out there, insurance, finance, agriculture, etc., retail. Again, from my perspective, from what I'm seeing in the industry, I've watched for the last 20 years, I think applying the traditional market approach to product solutions, sales, marketing to new markets is not working. So what do I mean by that? I think that GIS vendors and GIS solution providers are looking at how they've been successful in the traditional marketplaces. And remember, GIS is largely being used in organizations that have GIS departments, or at least staff that understand GIS. They're trying to apply the approach that's been successful in, let's say, the public sector, and applying that in the private sector. And there's lots of things that are different about the private sector in the commercial world, which means that those type of approaches are not maybe as successful as they should have been. And I think as a consequence, GIS and geospatial in general has not really crossed the chasm. It's really still stuck in the traditional marketplaces and has struggled to move beyond that, particularly into the commercial sector. Okay, so we've posed two questions. Let's answer both of these questions. As the title suggests, my sense is we need to make geospatial invisible. So what do I mean by that? And here's a statement that I made in the week, and there was a Cora made had an article out that I kind of got part of this title from. We need to make geospatial invisible, but fundamental to all business activity. That will be achieved by us no longer talking about it in isolation, but as part of other business systems, embedding or integrating. So that's my sense. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that statement. So what do I mean by invisible? Essentially what I'm saying here is making geospatial an essential part of business workflows. So let's do some pretty pictures. You've heard me mention in the past that really GIS built its foundation off of two-dimensional data and flat maps. So we talk about layers, and you can think about layers as almost acetates on top of a base map. That's really where we built our world, and it's really been very much centered around maps and map making. And we have a traditional user base, as I mentioned. It's sort of the public sector. In the US, it's federal, state, and local government, and it's infrastructure organizations as well that clearly with distributed assets like utilities, transportation organizations, etc. It's obvious that to those groups that GIS is applied, and they have GIS departments that do that work. So when we start thinking about, and I've mentioned a lot in this Geospatial-Next conversation about this emerging new world, and this notion of an inflection point. Well, what's driving the inflection point within the industry? Well, it's really the availability of new data sets. So we can now collect and generate 3D data, real-time 4D data. So these new sensors allow us to do this, and the processing power to do that. Artificial intelligence, machine learning is obviously going to help process and analyze that new data. So we've got a lot more data, and that's really what's the definition, I think, of this inflection point. But it's all well and good having data and new algorithms, but what do we do with that? There is an approach today which suggests that we need to put it into a GIS and give that to the user base, to a wider user base. So sorry, to the traditional user base. And I think undoubtedly that's a right path to go down. If you've got location-based data, it makes a lot of sense to bring it into a system which is designed for location-based data, which is a GIS. So it makes a lot of sense to go that way. But my fear is we're still looking at that traditional user base. We still have the challenges of getting that stuff out of the GIS department, and it also doesn't really cover the world that is not using GIS. So to me, one of the key parts of the conversation is, and again, anyone that's followed me on Twitter or on LinkedIn will have seen me mention this, we have to embed this or integrate this into existing business systems, and SAP and Salesforce are two examples of that. Maximo from IBM is another one. There's a lot of other ones. Teams as well can be, there's an integration within there as well. Now that brings in a new user base. So it's very important to sort of think about, there's the GIS traditional user base that are sort of map centric and understand the value of the technology, and maps are a driving part of that. There's business systems, business intelligence, which is really visualizing data and is not GIS, even though there's a lot of conversation about the expansion of business, like Tableau, business intelligence solutions. I'm not talking about that here. I'm actually talking about business systems. So I'm actually talking about workflows here. That is, what am I doing to get from A to B to solve a problem within these existing systems, and where can we integrate maps and geospatial location intelligence into that world? So that's a new mindset, and it's a new way of doing things, and people have been feared from a technical perspective how we do embedding and integration. Well, that's become a lot easier now, and it's again a lot of my world is sort of focused on that at the moment, is the ease of doing that and those business use cases that we can apply this to. So to me, that's what we mean by invisible. It's a given piece of that world. So how do we get to that place is a key thing. And this is actually going to be leading into another talk that I'll do beyond this. So I'm not going to go into details here, but I think there's two key requirements. I think we need to change our thinking, and we have to change our approach. Within the industry, we keep repeating the same thing. It's a rinse and repeat to go into the commercial world. We're trying to tell GS managers, you need to get the stuff out there. I think we need to change our thinking. I'm not saying that there's not some validity in some of that stuff, but I think if we're only focused there and we keep singing the same song, it gets a little bit old, and I don't know if it's that effective. So I think new approach and new thinking is needed, and I think that applying the innovator's method is critical. And this is where I'm going to do another talk. So there's a really good book called The Innovator's Method. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's really a fundamental book, and it's really based on a lean startup. So the title of the book is Bringing the Lean Startup into Your Organization. And I think that this approach is essential in all organizations to actually build, I argue, a department, a group that are focused in this way, that are driving innovation within the organization. And the focus really is to solve those two problems I've just spoken about. How do we widen it by taking new approaches and understanding our customers and embedding things into existing workflows, so GIS and Geospatial are invisible, they're just given, they're there, and it's part of instead of focusing purely on maps and location, we quietly embed this stuff into existing workflows. So that's our talk today. Like I've said, I love your comments and feedback. I will be doing another one on this, actually very much focused on this idea of the innovator's method. So thanks for watching. Look forward to doing the next one.
Thanks for joining us on the Geospatial-Next channel. We're focused here on understanding the future of geospatial. That's both how we get to mainstream adoption of the technology and data, and how we start using blockchain and crypto to move things forward. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.